The next we are going to see is about angle of minimum deviation. So this is the same as angle of deviation which we have seen. But here we are going to draw a graph between the angle of incidence and the deviation. So when you look at the graph, what happens is one could observe that the angle of deviation decreases with the increase in the angle of incidence. Okay. Suppose consider this to be the angle of incidence I and this side to be the angle of deviation D. So we can say that the angle of deviation first it decreases with the increase of incidence. As the angle of incidence increases, the angle of deviation continues to decrease. Okay, till a particular point reaches a minimum value. Until a particular point. After this, what happens is it continues to increase. At what point it is decreasing the most? That is it to be the angle of minimum deviation. Clear? So this is a graph which represents between the angle of incidence and the angle of deviation. So when you see here, it decreases uh, until a particular point, but after that it begins to increase. Okay, and that point is said to be the angle of minimum deviation. And at that point we can say that both the angle of incidence and angle of refractions are equal. Okay, so the thing is the minimum value of angle of deviation is called as a angle of minimum deviation. So at what angle it is very low, okay, and that is said to be what angle of minimum deviation. And at the angle of minimum deviation, what are the conditions is both the angle of incidence are equal. Angle of incidence is equal to the angle of emergence. Okay, one angle of emergence which is I2. Okay, so I1 is equal to I2. Next is the angle of refractions are equal. R1 is equal to R2. Okay, so I1 is equal to I2 and R1 is equal to R2. So this is a condition of angle of minimum deviation. So when you draw the diagram, so we can say that I1 and I2 are equal. So we are writing just to be I. R1 and R2 are equal. So we are writing as R. And this angle of deviation we are writing as capital D, which is angle of minimum deviation. Clear? The incident ray and the emergent ray are symmetrical with respect to prism. Okay, so when you see with the help of prism, the incident ray and the emergent ray, they both are seem to be symmetrical. Then the refracted ray inside the prism is parallel to the base of the prism. Okay, so this is a base and here will be the refracted ray that will be parallel to the base of the prism. Okay, so this is about the angle of minimum deviation. Next is we are going to see with the refractive index. So the refractive index of the prism at the material of the prism, for this the condition is what I1 I2 is equal to I. Next is R1 R2 is equal to R. So considering with the equation, so this is the equation which we know already from the deviation itself, that is D is equal to what I1 plus I2 minus A. Now what is the value of I1 and I2 which is given is I. Okay, so instead of I1 and I2 we substitute as I, we get the value as I plus I minus A. Okay, so I plus I is what 2I. Okay, so it is 2I minus A. Okay, now bring this A to the other side. Okay, so we get D plus A, which is equal to what, this side we have the term 2I. Okay, so D plus A which is equal to 2I, and if you bring this 2 down, this can be written as A plus D. So I is equal to A plus D divided by 2. And one more equation what we know from the prism is R1 plus R2 is equal to A. Same way here also, instead of R1 R2 substitute as R, so we get R plus R. So what is the value of R plus R, which is 2R. So 2R is equal to A. Now bring this 2 down, so we get R is equal to A divided by 2. Okay, so we have got the value of I. So I is equal to what, A plus D divided by 2, and we have got the value of D, sorry, R is equal to A divided by 2. Substituting this both in the Snell's equation. Snell's law is what? Sin I divided by sin R. Instead of I, substitute it as A plus D divided by 2, and instead of R, substitute as A divided by 2. So we get the value of n to be n is equal to sine a plus d divided by 2 divided by sine a divided by 2. Okay, here a and d are the angles which can be measured. Okay.